Alrighty, Kosovo Crisis 2.7, the impact of the war, social and economic consequences. Okay, the key question you should have in mind as we are going through this section is how do forces for change shape a new society in Kosovo? So when we look back even at Rwanda, we can talk about how did forces of change shape a new society in Rwanda to make the comparison to the other unit, but how does this happen when it comes to Kosovo specifically? So how did these forces change, how did forces for change shape the new society set up in Kosovo? This right here, cartoon, kind of is a good example of explaining the dilemma that they're stuck between. Which way do they go? Okay, do they go towards Serbia, or do they basically starve and suffer and die? They really have kind of a rock and hard place decision. Chronology of events and stuff right through here explaining what's happening. So number one, in June, the peace agreement between NATO and Yugoslavia ended a period that had been going on for years. Okay, so the crisis and stuff is officially going to be over. Right now, there is going to be a peace agreement signed in June of 1999. Most Serbs are going to ultimately leave the region of Kosovo because they don't feel comfortable being there, which is pretty justifiable in all honesty. Additionally, there was a number of reprisals against the Serbs who were there. So Kosovar Albanians who were opposed to Serbia are now taking revenge, so to speak, on some of these Serbs living in the region, even if they weren't necessarily in support of what Serbia was doing to them. Much of the infrastructure, homes, roads, bridges have been bombed or damaged in Kosovo, so Kosovo is really a war zone at this point. Even though there's not fighting going on, the country is in ruins. There were institutions that were in place to help Kosovo get back on its feet. However, it's going to take some time to do. As you can see right here, the bedrock of a stable society is the ability of a government to offer the possibility of prosperity for people through employment and the opportunity to develop and make progress. So basically, in order for the country to be successful, the government has to be able to provide for its citizens. If the government cannot provide for its citizens, the country will not be successful. So therefore, really, the future success of Kosovo is ultimately going to depend upon the ability of the Kosovar government to take care of its individual citizens. Evidence is going to suggest that the major consequences for Kosovo in the years immediately after the NATO intervention were scarcity of economic opportunities, unemployment, and lack of security. So basically, they were not safe. They did not feel safe. And there really wasn't much when it comes in terms of economic opportunity for people living in Kosovo. So they were poor, they were living in a destroyed country, and they really did not have any security or really any way of getting out of that crisis or that kind of situation they're sitting in. You can understand this is going to cause a series of problems. Now, even though it is the official fighting between NATO and Serbia is done, there is going to be sporadic violence that's still going to occur between the two ethnic groups. We can see an example right here in 2004. Understand when you're talking about this that the violence does not end when the crisis and the ceasefire is signed. Those feelings are still present. Okay, if you go to Kosovo today and talk about this crisis, there's going to be a lot of hard feelings right through there. You go to Serbia and talk about this crisis, there's going to be a lot of hard feelings there. So understand that just because the fighting officially is over, the feelings and the reasons for that fighting aren't necessarily gone. Rebuilding Kosovo's security and their economy and their society is crucial. It needs to happen. Kosovo had been predominantly Albanian ethnically for a very long period of time, and there's going to be a region of great ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity. As we've already talked a number of times, the Balkans are an ethnic, cultural, and religiously diverse area. That is not going to change. Kosovo is going to be another one of these regions. And that's going to really have a number of influencing factors when it comes to rebuilding Kosovo after this crisis. Okay, what do we do? How do we manage to balance all these different things together in a successful way? Kosovo is a region with a lot of natural resources, particularly mineral deposits, which allow them to make some money. For example, lignite right here is the greatest natural resource that Kosovo is going to produce. You can see on the graph right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's number 5 in the world. Which is huge. Okay, when you put it there, it's roughly on par with China, the third largest country, fourth largest country on Earth. Kosovo's flipping tiny, and it's roughly on par with China. So they do have some resources. However, they are still a very, very poor country. The entire economy is going to be old-fashioned at this time. It needs to be modernized, and the infrastructure in Kosovo is going to be outdated. Not to mention, the stuff that was around was pretty much destroyed in the conflict and the crisis. So that's problematic. You can see right here some examples of some of the mines in Kosovo and the regions where they're going to be getting some of their resources out right through there. The majority of the agricultural products that are going to be used by Kosovo is going to generate hardly any income for the country because they're basically using them themselves. So this is the same as basically growing a garden in your backyard to feed yourself. You're not making any money off of it, but at least you're not starving to death. Kosovo, after the war, is going to be heavily dependent on foreign and international aid. Basically, they're not going to be able to sustain themselves without the international aid. Yugoslavia is going to be benefiting from the resources of Kosovo during the entire existence of Yugoslavia, but they historically had given little in return to Kosovo, and the consequences of this are clearly seen after the crisis. So we're going to be seeing Kosovo really struggling after this because they don't really have much at all, because Yugoslavia had been taking all their resources and not really giving much back to the region of Kosovo. Labor market is going to impact the situation as well. This is important to sum up this whole section in a short little way. Basically, people are leaving Kosovo to go work somewhere else, and then they're sending their money home to Kosovo, meaning there's a lot of people who aren't actually living in Kosovo who are Kosovars because they can't make any money there. It's just a poor country. There's not really any economic opportunity. Go somewhere you can make some money, send the money back home to your family that's still living there. So there is a large diaspora, so to speak, of Kosovar Albanians throughout the rest of Europe. Kosovo is going to tie itself to the euro, which is going to allow them to keep their inflation low. Kosovo's citizens, though, remain up until this day in 2020 the poorest citizens of Europe. GDP of $7,600 in 2013. That's their per capita GDP, which is low. Okay, that is incredibly, incredibly low. Just do some research real fast and Google average GDP of France, GDP per capita of France compared to Kosovo. Kosovo is incredibly low. 34.5% of the population is going to be living in poverty, and 12% are classified living as extreme poverty. That's problematic. Okay, for example, we can see right here an estimated 45% of the country was unemployed in 2013, so roughly 1 out of 2 people unemployed, living on about €2 a day, which is not a lot of money. For US dollars, this is roughly a gallon and a half of milk. That's the same equivalent of what you're living on for the day. 34.5% of the population, again, in poverty. 12% of them are classified as extreme poverty. So this is incredibly, incredibly broke. The people are poor. They don't have a lot of stuff. And that's going to cause a number of economic and social problems, as you can understand right through here, particularly when it talks about refugees. Social consequences can be measured in ways other than just statistics. Go and look at what's happening in the country. Ethnic cleansing is going to be appearing on the doorstep in Europe during this crisis when it starts off, which is a big reason that NATO is going to ultimately get involved. They're going to say, basically, we cannot tolerate ethnic cleansing in Europe. We're going to step in and do something. It is important to consider the scale of suffering in light of what you know about the conflicts, other conflicts, particularly when it comes to the 20th century. Even though the number is only 10,000. It doesn't necessarily matter if it's 10,000 or 6 million. That's a lot of people who are dying. Does it really diminish the scale of the crimes that were committed? And this is a good question to really discuss. And I would be able to have a pretty good opinion on both sides of this issue, because that could be something that IB will be asking, particularly when it comes to looking at perspective. Does it really matter how many people are killed? This goes back to the quote by Stalin: "One death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic." A death is a death. Okay, that's important to understand. So it does not matter really if it's 10 million or 10,000, which it was in Kosovo, 10 to 11,000, or 6 million, like with the Jews killed during the Holocaust by Germany. Suffering is suffering, and these people were suffering. That's important to understand. In Serbia, the government is going to claim that NATO was responsible for the death of around 500 people. NATO is obviously going to be disputing this, but Serbia is going to be saying that NATO, in their aggression, was responsible for the death of a number of individuals and civilians. We already talked about the convoy, the refugee convoy. It was bombed earlier, but NATO was responsible for the death of civilians. You could make a counter argument in here as well, just to kind of play devil's advocate, that Milosevic, in his putting of his military officials in like Red Cross convoys and putting them in heavily populated areas was partially responsible for the death of those individuals. Obviously, if you're a supporter of Serbia, you're going to be saying that's not the case. If you're a supporter of Kosovo, you might be saying that's the case. Again, perspective, looking at both sides of the issue right through there. The signing of the ceasefire agreement is going to be on June 12th, 1999. It did not bring an end to the killing or the suffering felt in Kosovo and throughout the region. So understand that just because a ceasefire is signed does not mean the suffering automatically ends and goes away, as I've already talked about. Acts of revenge are going to be happening. The Serb minorities and the Roma were immediately targeted for the revenge by many ethnic Albanians who basically look at them as complicit, okay, even if they're not supporting them. So that historically, previously before this, the Serbs were coming in and systematically killing Kosovar Albanians. And they're going to be saying that these people at this time are going to be saying that, hey, if you didn't stop this, you're complicit, therefore you deserve to die. Obviously, this is just going to be continuing this crisis, but this is going to be happening. It's important to understand that. There's going to be burning and looting of homes of Serbs and Roma. There's going to be the destruction of Orthodox churches and monasteries. And they're going to be the displacement of Serbs and Roma. They're going to be doing this because they view these Orthodox churches as a way of kind of the Serbs coming into their region and controlling it through religion. We see similar things happening during the Boxer Rebellion in China in the 1800s, and we see this happening in the Anglo-Egyptian War with Egypt right through in there, attacking Christian churches and missions. Religion can be used as a tool of oppression and a tool of colonization, so to speak, and that's kind of what they're viewing as happening right through here, which is why this is happening. There's no clear indication if this is happening as a coordinated policy on behalf of the KLA or if it's happening on behalf of Kosovo's political leadership, or if it's just a series of individuals who are upset and ticked off and trying to get revenge. So whether we don't really know what's happening or why it's happening, all we know is that it is happening. This is just going to be a different breakup of Kosovo's ethnic location where individuals are at. You can see majority Bosniak. We see Bosniaks right down in this region. Majority Serbs up here by Montenegro and Serbia. And then this area got some large Serb population as well. Gorani right down in here. These are the ones I believe come from, oh no, that was the other group, Persia. Understand there's big ethnic breakup in Kosovo as well. Many Serbs are going to simply live in Kosovo because they have nowhere else to go. They've been in Kosovo their entire lives. Their families have been in Kosovo. Where are they going to go? They're just going to stay in Kosovo. A number of them do live, though, because they don't feel like living in a Albanian-dominated state, just like the Albanians didn't want to live under a Serb-dominated state. You don't want to live as a minority. It's not a comfortable place to be, so let's go somewhere where we're not going to be. This is going to be this problem of social inclusion. Understand what social inclusion is. It's more than just an active form of citizenship. It's refusal to accept any type of discrimination. Social inclusion is something I would definitely mention when it comes to talking about this crisis and what's going on. Society in Kosovo is going to be fragmented along social lines. This is going to combine with economic problems and poverty. Is going to prevent the building of a stable and functioning society. So basically, it's not really any way of getting anything moving forward due to the social fragmentation of the country. There's a number of social problems that are deep. It's going to be hard to heal them. There's going to be large-scale violence breaking out in March 2004, an incident when 3 Albanian boys drowned. Allegedly, they were being chased by Serbs. These reports were false. It's going to be a testament, though, of the social instability. Anti-Serb riots are going to break out over information that's false. Regardless, it doesn't really matter because people are dead and the situation is very, very tense. Politically, the impact of NATO's bombing and the war in Kosovo. So there was de facto political leader of the Kosovar Albanians was going to be seen, and this is going to be basically, they're going to be seen as bowing to the will of the Serbs, which obviously is something the Serb or the Kosovars are not going to be liking. Rugova and the Democratic League of Kosovo, okay, the LDK, in the acronym they're going to be using in their language, had lost ground in 90s in resistance to the more aggressive KLA. Again, this is a belief that Rugova, this man right here, was basically too weak and wasn't going to really do anything. So the KLA is going to come in and basically say, get out of our way, let's be more aggressive. We're going to have the Dayton Accords when Kosovo was pretty much ignored, in all honesty. It did not gain him support inside of Kosovo, and he's going to be appeared that basically his nonviolence approach, his pacifist approach, okay, when we're looking at Rugova, the man on the right next to Slobodan Milosevic right here, that he's just going to be too passive and too peaceful, and thus that's going to really not get anything done when it comes to Kosovo independence. The Serbs would not let go of Kosovo easy, and there was nothing in the ceasefire agreement to indicate that Kosovo would gain its independence. Serbia is basically saying, this is part of our country. We're not giving it up. We'll have a ceasefire, but we're not going to give it up. They're ultimately going to kind of be forced to give it up, but they're not going to want to do that. If you go to places in Serbia today, they're going to necessarily say that Kosovo is part of Serbia. The KLA is ultimately going to be disbanded in the first weeks of the ceasefire as a result of them trying to gain attempted power locally. The international community is going to insist that Kosovo be multicultural. They're going to have Resolution 1244, which is going to disband and disarm the KLA and most of its members in the KPC, the Kosovo Protection Force, which was civilian defense force and effectively going to become the army in waiting. So understand what Resolution 1244 does. The KLA is now going to be overshadowed by other political parties in Kosovo, so they're no longer the most powerful group in the region. Kosovo is going to be experiencing its first political tug of war between the KLA and the LDK, with the community sitting more on the international community, kind of sitting more in favor of Rugova because they view him as a little bit more passive, a little bit more peaceful, and kind of the path forward to a successful non-violent Kosovo. In January of 2000, the United Nations group that's going to be looking at a situation in Kosovo is going to set up the constitutional framework, which is going to lead to general elections. The quote right here, I intend to build a multi-ethnic Kosovo which will not ignore history. So multi-ethnicities, okay, not just Albanian, not just Serb, but multi-ethnic Kosovo, but also one that's not going to ignore history. So accepting the fact that there was genocide happening here, not ignoring it, but accepting it and moving forward. There's going to be an expulsion and this fight of a number of remaining Serbs meant Kosovo was on its way to becoming a nearly ethnically homogenous state of nearly entirely made up of Kosovar Albanians. So the fact that a number of the Serbs living in the region leave is going to cause it to become incredibly Albanian when it comes to the ethnic makeup of Kosovo. We're going to have the elections in October of 2000. There's going to be the two groups, UNMIK and KFOR, are going to be vital in helping for the transition, but neither is going to be able to prevent the violence that's going to take place during the campaigning. There's going to be a series of violence in the campaign leading up to the election. The KLA is going to be reformed from a military organization into a political party. As you can see that right through here, gain control of revenue from the illicit activities that emerged when law and order were absent, collecting taxes, controlling a number of areas. The LDK is going to be led by Rugova, is going to dominate Albanian political life in the 90s, 92, and the unofficial elections are going to make him kind of the head of the organization. We're going to get this man coming in here, Thaci, right here. And the United States is not going to really be very comfortable with him, and other Western governments like NATO are not going to be real comfortable with him because he's a little bit more radical than Rugova. Rugova was a lot more peaceful and pacifist, which was part of the reason that people like Thaci are going to come to power because Rugova wasn't really getting much, they didn't think. Rugova's style of leadership was regarded as soft and liberal. He's a chain-smoking, scarf-wearing bohemian, concealed the wheel of steel. This man might look on the outside as soft and kind of laid back, but he is firm that Kosovo is going to be its own country. It's not going to be Serbia. His popularity in Kosovo is going to be indispensable. Violence is going to be part of the deep-rooting problem, which is going to be facing the problem the UN is going to try to look at and try to figure out a way of solving. As in Rwanda, the problems were compounded by the lack of law enforcement and an effective judiciary. So just like in Rwanda, we couldn't really take care of the situation after the genocide because there wasn't really any successful and effective form of law enforcement, and there wasn't really an effective judiciary system to try people. Same kind of system is going to be happening in Kosovo. Rugova had begun his political career as a pacifist. He meant to be a pacifist throughout the entire time, but he is not ever going to step away from his belief that Kosovo should be in an independent country. He's widely regarded as a fervent nationalist who rose above party politics to lead his country to independence. which is important to understand, okay, the perspective right through here. Members of the KLA might not look at Rugova in this way. However, overall, he is kind of seen as a fervent nationalist who ultimately is the one who led Kosovo to their independence. Going to survive a botched assassination attempt in 2005, but he's ultimately not going to live to see the fulfillment of Kosovo independence when he's going to die in 2006. Okay, so right before Kosovo does gain its independence on February 17th, 2008. Now, it's going to be International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. It's going to be set up in May of 1993. We're talking about the Bosnian crisis. It's going to happen before the genocide in Rwanda. Then Rwanda happens. They're like, hey, maybe we should do something about this crisis going on in the Balkans. The tribunal had jurisdiction over crimes that were allegedly had happened in Yugoslavia since the outbreak of hostilities. Established initially to try cases of humanitarian law, but it has since been modified to address cases in post-conflict situations such as Kosovo in 1999 up through 2001. So it wasn't just focusing on Bosnia. It's going to be focusing on anything that happened in the Balkans at this time. The Yugoslav government refuses to cooperate with the tribunal, basically stating that it is a fraudulent tribunal. This isn't an actual court. We're not going to listen to you. NATO is going to begin their bombing immediately after this happens, or shortly after this happens. The International Criminal Tribunal on Yugoslavia, ICTY, is going to set up offices in Albania to start looking into these humanitarian law violations. There's going to be no statute of limitations on war crimes. So just because you committed a war crime maybe 50, 60 years ago, statute of limitations saying you can only try it for a certain number of times after the crime happened, that's not the case when it comes to war crime. May 27, 1999, Slobodan Milosevic is going to be indicted for war crimes and crimes against humanity. This is a list of some other individuals who are going to be indicted for those crimes as well. These charges do not relate to crimes committed in other wars of Yugoslavia, but specifically to Kosovo. Okay, that's important to understand. Carla Del Ponte right here is going to be the chief prosecutor. Understand who she is, understand her names. She's also going to be working with the situation in Rwanda. Okay, so this is going to be another connection right through here. Understand what Carla Del Ponte is going to be doing. Okay, reasonable to assume that local courts could handle some of the crimes of Kosovo. However, there's going to be the lack of appropriate machinery. Basically, they don't know what they're doing and they don't have the ability to actually do it. Serbian government is going to argue that others, besides just the Serbs, should be facing trial as well. We're not just going to try the Serbs because it wasn't just the Serbs who were committing war crimes. The KLA committed a number of war crimes as well. We should be trying them. Serbia had always held that the KLA was a terrorist organization and they had committed war crimes as well. This was the case. They did ultimately try to do this, but the prosecutors were unable to prove that the KLA itself had an official policy of targeting civilians and engaging in war crimes. The belief was kind of that it wasn't necessarily the entire KLA doing this as it was with Serbia. So the allegations were never proven because of Milosevic's death. But individuals within the KLA who are doing this. Rape is going to be used as a weapon of ethnic cleansing, just like happened in Rwanda. We've talked about this already. You terrorize the civilian population and force people to flee their homes. You get them there and then you kill them. Milosevic is going to call for presidential elections in September of 2000 to try to reaffirm his grip on power. But people are basically sick and tired of Milosevic, and he is going to lose. Okay, they're looking back at Yugoslavia through the last decade, throughout the 90s, and basically think that Milosevic, because of your failed leadership, we've dealt with a series of crises and a really bad 10 years. You're gone. We don't want you anymore. Milosevic is going to be indicted in May of 1999, as I've already talked about. And it's going to show that the international community is determined to get anyone who's committed war crimes. You can't hide behind diplomatic immunity because you were doing it as the leader of the country. You committed a war crime, you're going to be tried. Del Ponte right here is going to urge the UN to pressure the Yugoslav authorities, particularly the new president, to arrest Milosevic. Milosevic is actually not really wanting to do this. Eventually, they're going to arrest him, though, because the money. Okay, it's going to come down to money. The UN is going to basically give Serbia money and say, we're going to give you aid if you do this to Yugoslavia, $50 million. And that's going to be ultimately what leads him to getting arrested. There were a number of other leaders in the world at this time who supported Milosevic and did not believe he should be arrested, such as Russia. Russia is going to be important. So the Serbian police are going to arrest Milosevic on April 1st. April Fools, not getting arrested for war crimes. He's going to be the first former head of state to stand trial for crimes against humanity, known as the Butcher of the Balkans. So understand that. He's going to appear in court on July 2nd for the first time, refusing defense counsel. He was an attorney, but he's ultimately going to say, I'm going to represent myself because I'm not going to be giving this sham court any like an attorney, because if I give him an attorney, we're going to be basically saying that this is a true court. This is the sham court. We're not going to listen to this. Largest and longest war crimes trial ever is going to ultimately end with his death in March of 2006. Again, he's going to refuse to recognize the authority of the tribunal, as I was just talking about right through there. Understand that. During the entire trial, Milosevic consistently talks about delaying the proceedings, scolding the West, and questioning the legitimacy of the court. Milosevic's plan is basically, let's just see how long we can hold this thing out. His advisors are going to urge him to leave The Hague, where his trial is being held, and to go to Russia for medical treatment. This is going to be denied now, and he's ultimately going to die before. Now, remember, the Russians supported Milosevic. So whether or not Milosevic was trying to go to Moscow for medical treatment, or if he was trying to go to Moscow for medical treatment and then have asylum granted to him, which is reasonable to believe it could have happened, is debatable. This is ultimately the reason he was not allowed to go to Russia, because they said there's sufficient medical treatment in The Hague. In Europe right there. You don't need to go to Moscow for the medical treatment. You can get it right where you're at. Basically, this is just a way of you getting out of the country so you can get political asylum. He's ultimately going to die. So once he dies, the cases are going to be ultimately dropped without physically proving it. However, there was a lot of evidence to basically prove that he did do these crimes. So Milosevic officially has never been convicted of war crimes, because the trial never ended when he died. However, probably would have been convicted. Milosevic is considered the most dangerous figure in post-Cold War Europe because of this whole crisis. There are those who still worship and value his legacy, so understand that some people still really like Milosevic, even though he did a lot of really justifiably negative, horrible things. Legacy is years going to foster mutual estrangement with the Serbs, Croats, Bosnians, and Albanians are going to haunt the region for years to come, because it's kind of a crisis, and these people in this region are still suffering from the results of the crisis. Looking at the ICTY, it's going to be criticized by a lot for being politically motivated. One of the reasons right here, we're going to have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is to allow the Serbs to administer their own justice. So basically, let Serbia control what's happening in Serbia for some of the lesser crimes. There's always going to be critics of a system, especially when that system is set up by the so-called winners of the war, which obviously was going to be NATO and not Milosevic right through here. The NATO campaign is going to be hailed as a victory for democracy, the rights of oppressed minorities by many. However, there's going to be a less clear-cut objective right here, whether or not NATO was really getting involved in protecting minorities, or if NATO was just trying to kind of flex their muscles on a domestic dispute within a country. This is a good connection right here to Hitler when it's talking about Hitler's aggression in the Sudetenland. He's going to be doing it because he's claiming ethnic Germans are being prosecuted, just like Milosevic is doing it because he's claiming Serbs are being prosecuted. Perspective, understand the perspective right through here. NATO's campaign against Yugoslavia is going to be strongly opposed by China and Russia, two members of the UN Security Council who had veto power, which is the reason the United Nations never really officially did anything. India is also going to be opposed to it, but to a lesser extent. Russia at this time is opposed, one, because of the ties between Milosevic and Serbia and the Russians. Also, during this crisis, the Russians were dealing with a similar crisis in Chechnya. Chinese have long had issues with the Uyghur and the Tibetans for self-determination. So kind of a similar situation going on with the Chechens in Russia and the Uyghur and Tibetans in China. It's going to show the importance, though, of national sovereignty. So understand national sovereignty and what it is. Intervention in Kosovo and not Rwanda is going to basically show the world a new set of rules for the post-Cold War world. Seemed the consensus among major powers was impossible, and that the moral imperatives of their own national and humanitarian interests outweighed national sovereignty. So basically, there's a crisis right now. We have to do something that's more important than ultimately getting involved, because it's what's best for our individual country. This and the reflections, you should know all of these. That's all I'm going to say right through there. I'm not going to talk about them, but you need to know these like the back of your hand. It's going to build connection between Rwanda and Kosovo. So that is all for this section. I know this is a very long video. I apologize for that. If you have any questions, comments, please put it down below. We will discuss this all in detail in class. Have a good rest of your day. Good luck. Bye-bye.